Hello my fellow organ players out there. I thought I'd do a little video on playing bass on the organ. It's a topic that is not too widely covered, and it's especially interesting to me since I am basically a bass player. These days I'm becoming 50-50 organ player and bass player, but I used to have bass playing as a profession, and I fell in love with a Hammond organ a couple of years ago, and when the Nord came out with their C1 I immediately bought one, because then finally I had the sound of a B3 at fraction of the cost and an even smaller fraction of the weight to haul around. These days I have my own organ quartet with a singer, drummer and a guitar player, and I also have started to play quite a lot of gospel organ, which I think it's a fantastic music form to play. But on to how to play bass on the organ. Then this was started up by, as far as jazz is concerned, I think Jimmy Smith perfected it, and to mention names that I think you should look up, that's obviously Jimmy Smith, Jack McDuff, Jimmy McGriff. Groove Holmes was a fantastic bass player on the organ. He was doing bebop songs at incredible tempos. Dr. Lonnie Smith, he plays marvelous funk bass as well as good solid jazz lines. You should study Tony Monaco. He's a modern player. Joe DeFrancesco. There's a couple of Swedish guys, one called Pierre Svärd, S-W-A with 2 dots, R-D. A guy called Palle Wagnberg. Palle Wagn, that's W-A-G-N-B-E-R-G, Palle Wagnberg, who actually at bebop tempos he will double in his foot what he plays with his hand to give a short an attack to the sound. He's a fantastic man to watch. So these are recommendable jazz organists to study. When it comes to gospel bass, they all play extremely good foot bass, toe heel technique. They will not play as much left-hand bass, except when it comes to shout music, when the gospel organist will alternate between foot and hand. And also one difference that I've noted is that the gospel organists have the lower manual as their main manual and will usually play bass on the upper manual. The jazz players, since they use the percussion sounds, usually comps and play bass on the lower manual. But I would also like, since I know how to play the bass, actually learning how to play bass on the organ has been easier than doing all the other stuff. My biggest challenge is the coordination. It's not necessarily what to play, what bass notes to play, it's how to play it and how to move what I know on the bass onto the organ. But you also have to find out the things that works on the organ and what does not work, what is not directly transferable. And I think a common mistake that keyboard players do that switch to the organ, or piano players that will switch to the organ, is that they don't spend enough time actually studying the bass parts on the organ. And if you want a really good solid organ jazz sound, you need to play good bass on the organ. It's probably more important to be a good bass player on the organ than having a fancy solo technique, because if you play fancy solos against a weak bass line, it won't sound that good. It probably won't swing. But if you reverse it, if you got a very solid bass line, good solid swing, and you can keep play a simpler solo on top of that and still get away with it. It's also important when you play with a drummer as an organist to have the drummer play strongly on 2 and 4 on the hi-hat when he closes the lids on 2 and 4, and actually have him overemphasize that. Eddie Landsberg has got a good video here on YouTube on that. There is also a whole page devoted to bass playing on the organ. I will try and find that link and put it into the explanations to this video. So if we start from the basics in bass playing is playing the 1 and 5 on beats 1 and 3. This is common in most music forms: gospel, jazz, country music, whatever. When you play bass on the organ, you will do that on the lower 2 octaves. The type of sound that you decide to use will probably vary a bit between various forms of music. Joe DeFrancesco and Jimmy Smith played with predominantly 808, and they would add some of the second drawbar, the sub 3, to give the bass sound a little more growl and compensate for the fact that you have foldback in the bass on the Hammond organ. The foldback on the other hand is used very efficiently by Joe DeFrancesco, so he can basically stay within the proximity of the second C from the bottom, and have it sound like he's shifting octaves all the times, which he in fact the organ does it for him. So if you're playing fast tempos, try to actually keep your bass lines contained more or less within 1 octave. And it's also important that you practice your bass line so they become an integral part of you. You shouldn't have to think about it. They should just come out of your hands, so you can focus on the other stuff. Personally, I have various segments, blocks of bass lines that I string together. So coming up to a shifting point, I will decide which way to go next, but once I've set off my fingers or my foot onto that path which leads to the next note, I don't have to think too much about what my fingers and foot are doing until I come to the next decision point. And I think the longer blocks you have, the less you need to worry about the bass. One thing I think you should strive for is to play your organ bass in a bass player-like manner. And this is why I brought the bass along. Normally on the bass, the strings are in their fourth apart, which means that from one hand position, without moving your hand up and down the neck, you can get a certain amount of combination, and it's quite comfortable to keep within certain boxes. This is how bass players play. So bass playing is partly derived out of how the instrument is made, constructed, what sounds good. And then this is apparent when also if you were to play guitar sounds on the keyboards. If you want it to sound like a guitar, you have to play it in a guitar player like manner, otherwise it will sound like a piano being played with a guitar sound, which is not the same thing. So when you play bass, it should sound like you're playing bass, not like you're having a bass sound and playing keyboard.